All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of your favorite podcast, The Fantasy Birds. Back with another buy low, sell high video, trying to get your teams in order for that playoff stretch, 3 to 4 weeks, and we're rolling into the fantasy basketball playoffs. Last week, we did 6 must-have trade for targets. A lot of those guys are looking good towards the end of the season. Karl Anthony Towns getting a new coach, getting more acquainted in that offense. Focal point in this new offense, his usage is going up. He's looking good. LaMelo Ball, after his health protocol safety outing, he is starting to ramp up again. He had a really good game against the Utah Jazz. And Jared Allen, we talked about how he was the biggest guy on that list, looking extremely solid for that Cleveland Cavaliers team as their starting center without Andre Drummond. So today we're going to get into some more buy low guys that we think can help you down the stretch, and some guys that maybe you need to be selling while their value is at their peak. So without further ado, let's get right into our list. All right, heading into week 10, we're going to start off with some sell high guys that we think might be able to a good move to get off your team now before they start come crashing down in a little bit. First of the list, it's Jimmy Butler and Donovan Mitchell. These guys, very high price names in the fantasy basketball, guys that you're taking at the top of your drafts, probably 1, 2nd, or 3rd round guys that have been doing extremely well over the past 2-3 weeks, and not necessarily guys we think that are going to lose all their value in the coming weeks, but just take a little bit of a hit with some other guys coming healthy on their teams. In particular, Jimmy Butler averaging around 10, 11 assists over the past week and a half. He's not LeBron James. He's not going to get you 25, 10, and 10 on a nightly basis that he's been flirting with over the past week and a half with some injuries on that Miami Heat team. Goran Dragic getting healthy, other ball handlers coming into the rotation. It's going to limit Jimmy Butler's usage rate and assist numbers going down the line. So Jimmy Butler, a guy we think his numbers are going to tail off just a little bit. Nothing too crazy. He's not falling off a mountain or by any means, but a guy we think his numbers are a little bit inflated due to other guys being out. But with those guys coming back, we're looking to get Jimmy Butler just a little bit off right now. Same thing with Donovan Mitchell. Mike Conley's been out for a couple weeks with that hamstring strain. Donovan Mitchell's been the main point guard. We know when Donovan Mitchell is the point guard for that Utah Jazz team, the main ball handler, he's going to put up insane numbers. His assists have been up about 150%, about 3 more assists than usual. So with Mike Conley coming back, he's started off with a minutes restriction, but he's coming back to his normal usage in the coming weeks. We think Mike Conley is going to take those numbers away from Donovan Mitchell, maybe drop him about 3 or 4 fantasy points per game with those assist numbers coming down. So, but like I said, these two guys, not someone we're totally off on the rest of the way, just someone we think might take slight hits to their values. So maybe a potential good time to get rid of them off your team if you can. But who are you looking at on this list that you think might be able, as well as these other two guys, someone to get rid of?
Well, I'm definitely going to be touching on these next 3 guys, Terry Rozier, Tobias Harris, and Terrence Ross. Before I start on Terry Rozier, just kind of piggybacking off of what you were saying, one of the reasons that we have these 2 guys on the list, Jimmy Butler and Donovan Mitchell, these are 2 guys that also have name recognition value. And while name recognition value doesn't necessarily convert to actual production, what it does is for a lot of maybe the casual followers in the league, maybe they only set their lineup once a week. They don't check all the numbers of every player. They don't keep tabs on transaction trends and stuff like that. It's a good way to get an upper hand, get an advantage on some of the more casual guys in your league that aren't necessarily paying attention, and that can win you some money in the end. So, but just moving on to the 3 guys I'm going to touch on here. Terry Rozier is the first one. Terry Rozier has been balling out recently, and if you remember back to last year, this is the type of production that we expected from him last year when he was a mid-round pick, probably a 5th or 6th round pick. He was the type of guy that was going to see an increase in usage, probably have rather, let's say, inefficient numbers, but productive ones nonetheless. Well, he was outshined by Devontae Graham last year. Now, with Gordon Hayward coming into the fold, we all expected Terry Rozier to take more of a backseat, even more than he did last year. And while he has put up solid numbers so far this season, those have really gone up ever since Gordon Hayward has had sporadic injury issues over the past couple of weeks. Terry Rozier has scored 40 plus fantasy points in his last in 4 out of his last 5 games in a points league setting. With Gordon Hayward coming back soon and coming back to a full role once they get him back up to speed, especially after the All-Star break, this isn't really something that we expect to be sustainable. And I think it just comes down to that. I think Terry Rozier's value right now is about as high as it's going to get. And I think shipping him off now will net you the greatest return, because you might want to do that now, especially with the trade deadline coming up in a couple of weeks, depending on what your league settings are. You're going to want to get what you can, because you might not be able to get this production from him later. Tobias Harris is another example of this. Well, all 3 of these guys are an example of this, but Tobias Harris was a guy that us at the Fantasy Birds weren't very high on. A lot of people, even at ESPN, had him as, potentially an overrated asset. He basically fulfilled that role as being an overrated fantasy player in terms of his ADP. But in the past couple of weeks, he has increased his performance. This does not correlate with what he has been producing for the vast majority of the season. And I think a lot of that has to do with circumstances. In the past week and a half, he's put up 2 50-plus point games, nearing 60 points. That's great. Those are great individual games. However, the Sixers have had some road bumps in terms of injuries. Joel Embiid has missed a game. Ben Simmons has missed a game, and that's caused Tobias Harris to see an increase in usage. His rebounding numbers have also been up. He's had 3 games where he's had 3 games recently where he's had at least 12 rebounds. I don't think that's going to continue on a regular basis. He'll still put up solid rebounding numbers, but you would expect with Simmons and Embiid back in the lineup with their versatility to their games that his rebounding numbers are going to decline. So I think Tobias Harris is definitely another candidate to see a little bit of regression in terms of the spike in production he's had. And then the last guy I'm going to touch on here is Terrence Ross. The Orlando Magic have had some issues with injuries this year at the point guard position, involving Markelle Fultz mainly. That's thrusted guys like Cole Anthony and Terrence Ross into a role where they're handling the ball more. And while that's a season-long injury for Fultz, and you can expect the ball handling roles to continue for the rest of the season, the fact is that you got to look at what Terrence Ross is in his career. Terrence Ross is a streaky shooter. Terrence Ross is the guy that if you are in a 2K draft, you want to draft Terrence Ross in like the 6th or 7th round, and then he'll be your favorite player to shoot with. Like back in the day with Gerald Green, he'll get you. You can draft him late. He'll be available, and you can score 50 points a game with him because you can learn how to time his jump shot right. But in all reality, he's a very streaky shooter, and he can be very hot one night and get you 30, and then the next night, and the next maybe 2 or 3 games, his production can decline. Not to mention he's been putting up really good numbers, but he's only averaging about 23.3 points per game in a fantasy points setting on the season. These numbers that he's put up recently are not indicative of what he's been doing all season. And like I said, this is probably about his highest value. And if you're going to ship him off, now would be the time to do it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on all 3 of those guys. Now let's go look into some guys that we are trying to acquire for later on down the stretch, getting into some fantasy playoff action. And who on this list sticks out for you on the buy low section?
So the name that sticks out to me first, like I'll talk about Jeramy Grant for a second. Full disclosure, I don't want to speak for everyone here at the Fantasy Birds, but for me, I was very low on Jeramy Grant coming into the year. I always knew that he was a versatile player and he could give you production from multiple statistical categories. What I wasn't necessarily sure of was going to a team like Detroit, could he fulfill that scoring role? Well, throughout most of this season, he's proven that wrong. He's proven that he can, and he's put up almost 40 points per game in fantasy points league per game scoring, which if you got him around his ADP, which is about the 4th or 5th round, then that's knocking it out the park. That's one of those balance of power type picks that you can make that really puts your team over the top if you're trying to vie for that 1 seed or maybe even a playoff spot. So Jeramy Grant recently, though, his numbers have declined, struggled a little bit recently, but I'm going to change my tune from what my preseason prediction was. I think Jeramy Grant has proven me wrong, and I'm going to be high on Jeramy Grant now. Like he has been, he has kind of struggled recently. However, I think that with Blake Griffin being held out and probably going to be traded before the deadline, they're going to resolve that. The language of that was they're going to sit him out so they can work on his playing future, whatever that means. Probably means Blake Griffin's going to get traded. Jeramy Grant is going to see a lot of time at the 4, which so did Blake Griffin. So I think that's just going to continue to open up more minutes and more usage for him. Obviously, Detroit's going to try and get other guys like Saddiq Bey more involved. But I think Jeramy Grant has struggled in the past, in the most recent games that he's played. But I do expect that uptick to continue. And that's why I think if you want to get a guy that's been productive all year, but, talk someone into trading him after, maybe being soured by his recent production, you might want to jump on that right now.
Totally agree. Loving Jeramy Grant down the stretch for that depleted Detroit Pistons team. Some people probably can't even name 3 or 4 guys on that roster if you're just a casual fan, but definitely Jeramy Grant, someone you need to keep an eye on going down the stretch.
One name I will mention, by the way, Saddiq Bey. I know and we'll kind of touch more on waiver wire additions as the season goes on and as trade deadlines pass. But I did mention Saddiq Bey. Saddiq Bey is a guy that you do definitely want to look at if he's available on the waiver wires. He's going to get a lot more touches. He has been very efficient when he's played. He's been a really good scorer and rebounder. So yeah, Saddiq Bey is just another guy in Detroit. If you don't know very many names on that Detroit roster, Saddiq Bey is one you want to familiarize yourself with.
Totally agree there. Deandre Ayton, another guy we think his value is a little bit lower than it should be as of late. He's a 12 rebound a game kind of guy, and he hasn't hit 10 rebounds in 3 of his past 4 games. This is due to Phoenix Suns blowing out the competition in the past couple of matches they've had. We expect DeAndre Ayton to get his rebounds up, get those points up. Frank Kaminsky and Dario Saric getting a little bit more minutes just due to those blowout scenarios. So DeAndre Ayton, a guy we think can get right, not necessarily back to form how he was last year when he was a post-up player getting fed in the paint, more as a screener roller with Chris Paul and just cleaning up glass. So DeAndre Ayton, a guy we think his value is a little bit lower than it should be coming down the stretch of this season. Another guy, Kyle Kozma, he's going to have a 4-week stretch with Anthony Davis out to put up numbers. He's only averaging around 25 minutes a game, but the past 3 games, he's been over 33 minutes a game in each and every one of them. His stats are up across the board: points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and especially minutes, like I talked about. We can't underestimate the power of an opportunity for Kyle Kozma getting these more minutes, getting these more opportunities aside of LeBron James-led team. You're going to put up numbers. Kyle Kozma, a guy I'm looking to get at a low price just for a 3 weeks span. If you need some wins, Kyle Kozma definitely can aid in that category. So coming down this list, what piques your interest in Gordon Hayward?
Yeah, when we were talking about this in the production meeting before, I kind of wanted to just briefly touch on Gordon Hayward, just because Gordon Hayward has had a resurgent season with the Charlotte Hornets, and largely because of his usage rate. And this is large. And Gordon Hayward being on the buy low list is, like we mentioned, one of the reasons why we think Terry Rozier is going to be on the sell high list right now. Gordon Hayward. Listen, this one's very simple. Gordon Hayward has missed a couple of games due to injuries. He's been slowed down. He's missed 3 games as of late, and he's currently day to day. We don't know exactly how many more he's going to miss. So I think now would be a good time to snatch him up. If you are making a big time, here's what I would suggest. If you're really big fish hunting and you're trying to swing a trade for a LeBron or someone like that, Gordon Hayward is another guy that you can ask to be tagged into that trade. And I think I think the returns for that are going to be immense down the stretch if he comes back and is fully healthy down the stretch for the All-Star break. Again, he's struggled in the games that he has played, only putting up about 30 points. bringing his average down to about 34.5 points per game for the season in a fantasy points setting. This is not quite indicative, in my opinion, of how well he's been playing. Gordon Hayward has been a very solid asset all season, and I expect that to continue if he's able to use the All-Star break, get healthy, and then retain more of a conventional role throughout the rest of the season, like he has been up to this point.
Gordon Hayward, with that Charlotte Hornets team playing as well as they have been this year, was getting some rumors about an All-Star appearance. Didn't quite make it, but his numbers back it up. So we do love Gordon Hayward when he's back and healthy for that Charlotte Hornets team down the stretch. Last guy we're going to talk about, Mike Conley on this list, and it's kind of similar to some guys we talked about previously coming back from that injury. If he's available on waiver wire, I would definitely consider snatching him up. He's coming back with a minutes restriction. He's got to eat into Donovan Mitchell's workload, like we talked about earlier. But he's gonna get you around 31 to 33 points per game in a fantasy setting. We like Mike Conley, not really as a league winner kind of guy, but someone just to bolster the back end of your roster going down the stretch. So Mike Conley guy, someone's sleeping on him. We think he's going to have some value in the coming weeks. But guy not listed on this screen right here, we're going to talk about Christian Wood. We talked about him last week. But DeMarcus Cousins has been cut by the Houston Rockets. So Christian Wood is going to be the center for that team. We kind of already knew this, but this just solidifies it. He's going to be the only big on that team, really. So Christian Wood, if he's available, I'm going out to get him. I'm not worried about him getting shut down. They just gave him a bunch of money in free agency. When he's healthy, he's going to play for that team. He's going to need to develop chemistry with the rest of those guys. Christian Wood, if someone's down on him, worried he's going to get shut down, whatever, because they're losing, I'm not worried about that. Christian Wood, a guy I would love to have on my team if the price is right. But look, that's going to wrap it up here with us on the Fantasy Birds with another buy low, sell high, week 10 in fantasy basketball. We thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time with the Fantasy Birds.